Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Bach. I'm the director of our triathlon business at the UCAN company. And here today, I'm really, really excited about this. We have Triathlon Taren on with us. Welcome, Taren.
Hey Matt. Hey everyone. How you doing, Matt?
So I'm particularly excited about this because Taren, you're usually sort of on the other end of it. Like you're either, you're not often a guest on other people's shows. You're usually the host. You're usually the guy like interviewing other people. You're usually the guy behind the screen talking about, what you have going on in your world. But I'm particularly excited because you get to be the guest today.
Yeah, normally I'm the one that's stressing out about, oh, did I hit record? And I have actually miffed that up once or twice. So it's nice to be on the other end of it where like Matt's got this taken care of, and I just have to sit and sit and hopefully try to say a couple of smart things.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, we want to dive in ultimately into your journey in nutrition, the way that you use UCAN, sort of how you heard about it. But first, I want to just learn a little bit about, and for anybody who isn't familiar with you, Taryn, a little bit about sort of how you got into sport and how you found triathlon, and sort of maybe like what drove you to start podcasting and vlogging.
Well, I'll make a long story short. And it started out probably about, I would say the whole story is about 15 years ago. I was fairly unhealthy, about 215 pounds, and on a 5'8" frame. That's not a very good look. It's pretty hard to find size 40, 30 jeans. They don't make a lot of those. But when I got into university, I decided that I wanted to just get healthy. I didn't know what healthy meant at the time. And I went to the gym and just started kind of living like a bodybuilder because that was who I saw. I saw muscular guys walking around campus, so I figured that's what healthy meant. And eventually, over a number of years, ended up getting down to about 175 pounds. But it was really unhealthy at 175 pounds because it was nothing but protein powder and boiled chicken and things like that. And it was never really any fun. And of course, I got hurt trying to lift. I think it was a 275-pound bench press that I was showing off for probably one of the girls at the gym for. Got hurt, couldn't really lift any weight, and started running on the treadmill to do something to stay fit. And I thought, this is boring. Maybe I'll mix that up one day with the treadmill, one day with the bike, and then that got boring. And then I looked over and there was a pool at the local Y. So I started mixing it up and doing one day pool, one day run, one day bike. And I remembered that back in university, a friend of mine who I was in school with, he was a really, really good triathlete. And I asked him, like, what does it take to do a triathlon? And he said, well, it's really simple. Like you enter and then you do it. And then you do a triathlon. I'm like, no, no, there's so many things I gotta know. He's like, you'll learn it as you go. And that's how it all started about 10 years ago. And the podcasting and vlogging and all of that started about 4.5 years ago, just because I wanted something to do that wasn't work in a suit and tie. That was just a passion of mine that was kind of creative. So I started making videos on YouTube about the sport that I loved, which was triathlon. And that's how it all started.
Yeah, and apparently it is a major success. People love you. I mean, I got to meet you for the first time in person at Atlantic City 70.3, where you just competed and had a stellar day. Nice PR for yourself in the half Ironman. I think it went, what, 4:28? Is that right?
428, yeah. I'll say not everyone loves me. You clearly haven't looked at Slow Twitch. Whoa.
I mean, there's a lot. You got a lot of super fans because when we were there at Atlantic City, you were nice enough to come by the expo and hang out with me for a little bit. There were people just flocking over. They would see you from across the expo, and they're like, it's Taren," and they had this huge grin on their face, and they had their phone already out. They're like ready to take the selfie with you, and they were just flocking over for like that whole half hour, whatever it was that you were hanging out at the booth. It was crazy. So yeah, your personality is great, and you really do like a good job of some thorough research with a lot of the things that you do, and it's a lot of experimentation, and you try a lot of new things, and you're just looking for constant improvement. So I think it's great. You also, just to kind of brag for you a little bit, because I know you're a pretty humble guy. You did Challenge Roth, and that was your first full Ironman iron distance race, and you went 9:42. Is that right?
941.
9:41. I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
chipped you a
not
minute.
so humble that I'll let you get away with that minute. 9:41.
I don't want to chip you that minute. I'm glad you said something. Which is quite impressive. I mean, in iron distance, usually it takes several tries to kind of get it right, and you got a lot of things right apparently. So let's kind of dive a little bit more into the nutritional journey. I mean, how has that evolved since you started triathlon?
Oh, it's night and day, and it's still evolving. I would actually say that now is the first year that I'm really starting to focus on it after 10 years in the sport. The first 2 years, I did not pay any attention to it whatsoever. I was still kind of half in that bodybuilder lifestyle of trying to eat clean for 6 days and then having one cheat day. Around the third year of triathlon, I ended up giving up gluten just actually by accident, basically, because my dad is allergic to gluten. I went to the lake one day and forgot to bring any food, so I ate his food and ended up feeling really good, and that helped me lose a little bit of weight. And I had always focused a lot on the training and racing nutrition after about year 3 and 4, when I figured out that that was going to be a really big part of actually putting out a good performance. But I never really thought about kind of the overall picture, that what you have before a workout doesn't just make a difference in that workout, but it makes a difference in how you recover after, and can you string together more workouts after the fact. Your timing of the recovery meal, of the meal before dinner, looking at what I eat throughout the entire 24-hour cycle, or even actually throughout an entire season, and periodizing my nutrition throughout the season has really just come around this year. And that started becoming something that I was aware of last year in November, December, when I started working with Dr. Dan Plews, who coached me up to Challenge Roth. And I realized how big an effect the low carb approach to nutrition had for him, because he did his first Ironman, I think something like 6 years ago, and same sort of time as me. Like, he was a 9:20 something in his first Ironman. Good time, but you wouldn't say, this Dan Plews guy is going to set a world record in Kona one day. And he just gradually got faster and faster every year. And when we had him on our podcast, he said that the great thing about this low carb lifestyle is that you can just absorb and adapt to the training time after time after time, that as long as you put in the work, the nutrition doesn't ever hold you back. So that's when I started really looking into it. And still, like right now, it's something that we're really focusing on and trying to figure out. It's a multi-year process that we're working on.
Yeah, I'm a fellow fat adapted athlete. I haven't worked directly with Dan Plews on his methodology, although it seems really intriguing to me because of the fact that he uses keto as a tool, and he uses different, it's almost like a kind of a carb cycling approach, using them to enhance performance versus sort of like a straight, keto approach, or a straight low carb, high fat, or a straight, something. It's really intriguing. So, and I know you've got a good amount of material through your channels. So if anybody's interested in learning more about that, certainly check out some of Taren's vlogs and podcasts on those topics. In terms of nutrition, sports nutrition, so what did you used to use, and then how did UCAN come to the picture? Like, when did you first learn about UCAN and all that? Tell us more about that experience.
Let's say that from years 3 to even just last year, 2018, most of the nutrition that I had would be the same as what most people do. It was chews, blocks, bars, gels. I always thought, well, I'm going to be super healthy and not use Gatorade, but it was every other sports drink that I could have. And I had good performances. Sure, I ended up getting down to a 4:36 half Ironman, but always just felt like it was helpful in the race, but as a lifestyle, it was probably causing a lot of problems in my gut. I had and still have some gut issues. spend more time on the toilet than most triathletes. I have just kind of, in some testing, we found out that I don't absorb nutrients super well. So with the eventual goal in my mind that I want to get to Kona someday, and not being a really fast athlete naturally, I know that I have to have every cylinder firing at 100%, and nutrition is one of those things that I needed to fix because it just wasn't working for me the way it was. Now, what I'll have largely is, to be honest, like sports nutrition is kind of an afterthought, because when you become fat adapted, I found that when I was training for Roth in the months leading up to it, that I could go out for a 3-hour ride. And if I felt kind of hungry, yeah, maybe I'd bring a keto bar, a low carb bar. If I didn't feel hungry and I just eaten a lunch, I could go out and have water for a 3-hour ride and wouldn't really think anything of it. And then when I get back into a race, all the carbs in the world. And that mix ends up taking so much pressure off of getting that nutrition exactly right in a race, because you've got more flexibility. You're burning more fat, so you're not as reliant on the carbs in the race. And that's the whole purpose. It's not to become this fat burning machine that you can go out and do an Ironman on nothing or eating avocados through it. It's basically just so you have access to more calories, so that if you miss a nutrition feeding in your race, or your heart rate's a little bit higher and you're burning a little bit more calories, you've got access to calories. And it's not solely reliable on only eating. So that's kind of the philosophy of how I approach race nutrition, training nutrition now.
So did you experience, you said one of the downsides of that former nutritional approach was that you'd had, a good amount of simple sugars and simple carbohydrates, and so you had these gut biome type issues. And then did you ever experience other downsides that many people experience, like especially during your training and racing, but especially the racing, especially long course? I mean, you can't fake it in a long course triathlon. Did you experience issues like GI distress and bonking during your races?
Never really GI distress. I ended up figuring out a good pace and caloric intake for me, and sort of a good formula that allowed me to avoid pretty much any major nutrition issues in racing. But in training, I certainly had things that at times when I wasn't extremely fit, I could go out for a 3-hour ride, and for the last hour and a half, it would be awful. And my legs would be aching, and I'd just be thinking, I'm just not fit right now. It's not the season for this. I'm not ready for it. But what I've come to learn, and I've done this actually through testing, is almost intentionally blunted my fat burning at a time when I know I am a good fat burner. And the feeling of that, and basically the way that I've blunted it is by taking too much sugar to stop a lot of the fat burning, and how it feels is exactly like what I thought not being fit was. So the legs ache, the back gets sore, just everything stops functioning very well. And I used to just chalk that up to, it'll come around in the training. And now I'm realizing, no, that was basically a lack of calories, because I couldn't take in enough sugar to keep up to the amount of calories that I was burning, and I wasn't burning enough fat to make up for it. But now what I find is that 3-hour ride, that 4-hour ride, I can take something or I can take nothing. And as long as I know I'm in a good fat burning situation, I can go for hours and hours. And that was more the downside that I felt like I was getting held back on.
Mm-hmm. So the fact that you like, it's, they always talk about nutrition being like the fourth discipline, and it's almost like, instead of it being like a fourth discipline, like a fourth category, or like silo of itself, it's almost like, you have the three disciplines and you have nutrition that just overlies it all. Like you were experiencing these problems out in your training because the nutrition was impacting those, and it didn't matter what activity you were doing. Like if that was over a long enough period of time, it sounds like you probably had some some of those problems.
Yeah, it's almost like I would almost put it like this, that there's swim, bike, run. Over top of that is just general health.
Hmm. Hmm.
And one of the ingredients that goes into general health, even another level up, is nutrition.
Hmm. When was the first time that you heard about UCAN? How did that come into the picture?
Probably would have been about 2 or 3 years ago from another podcaster, blogger. And it always made sense to me because from my bodybuilding days, I remembered that you want like really, really complex carbs that take a long time to digest. So when I started hearing about this ultra, ultra complex carb that had really long sustained energy, it made a lot of sense. I didn't get around to actually trying it until I think it was January this year. And that was the first time that I actually got around to trying it. So it's just been this year as I've started focusing on it more, because here I was thinking, it's too complex a carb. I got my blocks and bars over here. I'm fine.
Hmm. And just to highlight, like I think these stats are fascinating to highlight how complex it really is. A sports nutritionist told me that the molecular weight of simple sugars is 180. The molecular weight of maltodextrin, which is considered a complex carbohydrate compared to the simple sugars, is 500. So 180, 500. Superstarch is 500,000 to 700,000. So it's like, it's completely different. And that's
Yeah.
really like another one of those things that just drives it home for me. Like this stuff is different. It really does serve like a very different purpose in many ways than, and is going to have a very different result in terms of like how happy your stomach is and that level of steady energy that you get from it. So then
Mm.
tell me, how did you learn, or you learned more about UCAN and then you started using it, and tell me, like, kind of walk us through a couple of the earlier steps of when, because I know the bars and hydrate, especially during the ketosis phase, you loving them, like they were awesome. And then tell us about Superstarch as well.
Well, yeah, I'll tell the story that I think you're alluding to, that I hope is not one that you want me to avoid. But when I
Please
first started
tell it.
trying Superstarch, it did not sit well with me, because what I was trying to use it for was in place of a sports drink. And because it's thick and it's chalky, and at the best of times to have a thick sports drink like a Gatorade, or um, even say a Scratch or an Osmo, if it's mixed thick, I would have a tough time drinking that. I always like very thin, light electrolyte drinks. And here I was drinking this like milkshake of carbs, and I had a tough time with it. And I think I came back to you and I said, I'm sorry, I wanted to like it, but I can't. And you said, sorry, it's not for you. It's too bad. And I still had a bunch of the product that I was trying. And I kind of went through it and just started trying it in different scenarios. So instead of a substitute for something, using it as a tool for different things. So instead of trying to have a bagel or something like that before a hard run, I would have a UCAN bar. And that was really helping me have just a nice settled stomach with a nice long string of energy coming after it. So I wouldn't have to say recarb or re-eat at any point during a long run. I could get away with just that bar that I'd had before during a workout because it lasted so long. And then because I was in a keto phase at one point for about 3 weeks, where I was basically eliminating all carbs besides 50 grams a day, I still needed some electrolytes. And here I was with all of my traditional light electrolyte fluids, which still had carbs in them. And because I'm a salty sweater, I didn't want to just go away from the electrolytes, but the UCAN electrolytes, it has no carbs. So it got me those electrolytes, got me the fluid, and didn't have any carbs. So I really liked it for that. And then somebody told me that instead of using that chalky UCAN, the one that I was trying to use as a drink, using it almost more as flavoring alongside other things. So now my typical pre-race meal is a small little bit of gluten-free Bob's Red Mill oats, and the flavoring of it is a package of UCAN. So it gives me a little bit of protein, some really nice complex carbs, and then the UCAN goes in there to make those carbs really, really slow digesting, long energy. So I started using UCAN not as an all the time thing, the way that people would traditionally look at sort of a family of carb-based energy products. I started looking at it as a tool for a purpose in certain scenarios. And from that standpoint, that was when I came back to you and said, yeah, like, okay, I'm using it again, and I'm into it. I found out how to use it, and it's working really well. So that's how it all evolved, from basically I heard about it to I'm trying it to I hate it to now I've got an entire drawer full of bars.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. One thing is, like, nutrition is so personal, and you got to find what works for you, and that's the process that you've gone through, and that you've just, you've kind of had to work through a few different things. And one of these obstacles was the consistency of it, which many of our users, they notice that it's thick. It's very different than most products, and it's like a shake, and it has a bit of chalkiness to it because it is a starch. And so some people like you just, it just bothers them because we're all different. So it
Yeah.
bothers them to the point where it's like, I can't drink this.
Yeah.
And there's some things that you can do to like improve the consistency. And I went through those things with you.
Yeah.
And even
Building
though
more.
you did it, it still was like, no, too chalky for me. So some people it's just like that, but you were able to find a way to incorporate it because you like the idea of it and you like the fact that it's giving you this steady energy, but find a way that you can incorporate it into your routine. So when you put it in your oatmeal, you don't notice that chalkiness or starchiness. It agrees with you.
Yeah, well, it is still a little bit chalky and a little bit
Mhm.
starchy, but if you mix it as overnight oats that night before, it's just part of the texture of the oatmeal.
Mhm. Cool. And then I've heard of people using the plain UCAN with their oatmeal to enhance basically give you more of that steady energy without changing the flavor. But you actually use the flavored versions with your oatmeal. So which
Oh
ones
yeah.
do you like best?
I like the orange, and for kicks, I tried the vanilla before the race in Atlantic City, and that was good. I can't. It's been actually a long time since I've tried the other flavors. Those have been my go-tos lately.
Hmm.
But those have been the ones that I found were sort of the lightest taste.
Hmm.
But that actually makes me think I should try the other ones in the oatmeal and see how I like that.
Yeah. Lemon oatmeal, cranberry raspberry oatmeal. I don't
Yeah,
know. If orange
cranberry
works, vanilla
oats.
works, then maybe.
Cranberry oats.
Yeah. And then the other point that I wanted to make is that well, actually, two more things. One is that all the keto people that I speak with, like anytime anybody's in ketosis and they're using UCAN, they love the hydrate product. And I guess there's something, just a feature of that is you don't retain fluid as much because you don't have so much carbohydrate, going
Yeah.
through the system. So then you really need lots and lots of electrolytes. So I think that's really, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons why that keto community loves hydrate, because it has that 0 calorie, zero sugar, no carbs, but it's
Yeah.
giving you the electrolytes that you need.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And one thing just to note of that, when there aren't carbs in it, if anyone here is tuning in and listening and thinking, oh, okay, well, I'll just substitute that, you do end up needing a little bit more of the fluid because carbs in a drink do help a little bit with absorption and actual fluid absorption across the gut and into your system. But when you don't have those carbs, you just need a little bit more fluid. So just I tend to drink off of sort of rules of thumb as opposed to sweat rates and things like that, because I find that it's a little bit more, a little easier to do. So if people already have a pattern of drinking, whether it's every 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, maybe just increase that a little bit. And that was what I found I had to do.
Hmm. And then the final point I wanted to make is, like, you kind of hesitated before. You're like, I don't know if you want me to tell this story, but I just wanted to make the point that, as a company, you can try, really strives to be very authentic and real. we try to help people achieve their best performance and work with them through some of the things like the obstacles. Like we're not trying to hide the fact that it is a starch and that it is chalky. And so that's why I kind of almost wanted you to say it, because other people are thinking that too. And it's, I wanted it to be kind of, out in the open. But the fact that, you still wanted the benefits of the super starch, and so you found another way to use it. So yeah, I just wanted to make that quick point. So then what do you have coming up, Taren?
An off season.
Good man. That's a smart move.
Yeah, really enjoyable right now. I'm actually 4 days into a 5-day fast mimicking diet right now, just to reset my gut and just further pay attention to overall gut health. And what I've battled a lot over the last, basically my entire life, is I eat out of habit, and my body starts sending signals that I'm hungry even when I'm not hungry, and that tells me that my microbiome is not quite right. I ended up doing a 5-day fast mimicking diet last year and did really, really well on it. Lost about 10 pounds that stayed off for a long time, but slowly those tendencies and symptoms of how it was before I'd done the fast mimicking diet crept back in. And amidst the Ironman training this year, it exploded, and I ended up actually putting on weight, even though I was training more than I ever have. So right now, that's what I'm going through. And I will head off to Kona to cover it on this Saturday. And hopefully that is one of the last times I just have to cover Kona. Next year I've committed to trying to make a run at qualifying for Kona. That's been the whole process of the last 10 years to try to get there. And we're going to actually try to take a run at it next year.
I love it. One thing leads to another. I did see your videos, or your most recent video on that topic, and I was excited to see that you're officially taking a stab at it next year. We'll see what happens. So one Ironman distance down at Challenge Roth. It wasn't a qualifying race because it's a challenge race. But do you know which one you're going to be racing next year? Which full Ironman event?
Not sure. I actually had just started doing the analysis of it using some data that we've got of amount of spots in the age group and qualifying times and topography of the course. It's looking like a race that sets up really good for me is Santa Rosa.
Mm-hmm.
Might make it that one, but I'm not entirely sure about it just yet. That seems to be one of the best. UK is also around that same time, and Frankfurt is around the same time, and those courses they set up somewhat well for me. And then I think I'll also throw in 2 of the China half Ironmans, and so that I can just basically get more attempts at going without having to do more Ironmans and destroy my body. And that's going to be a big learning curve, because I don't do well in the heat. I sweat a lot. I'm a salty sweater. And my best races have always been when I have like 18-degree weather. I'm from Canada, so that's our happy place. So I'm going to have to figure out the nutrition even more with that.
Yeah, any weakness gets exposed in the heat.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open it up to questions to anybody who's listening in now. Now that you've had a chance to hear a little bit about Triathlon Taren's journey nutritionally, and a number of these other things, the questions could be nutrition related, or they could be related to other things as well. So feel free to shoot your question over through the question chat box, and I'll take a look at them and answer. We can answer them as they come in.
While we're waiting for that,
yeah.
These guys are always very popular, so I'll just let everyone know that we've got a no triathlon dog there and another one at my feet. So super authentic and very professional here in the Triathlon Taren Pain Cave.
Could we get a peek at the bike too? I assume that's nearby if you're in your pain cave.
The bike, well, which one? They're not displayed very nicely now, because I would actually say no, because in behind here has been construction for the past 2 months, and the bikes now have a new home. They're here, but they're not displayed as pretty as they were before.
Okay. And also while we're waiting,
And
I'll give a little information.
I was doing some window casing before this, so it doesn't look very pretty over there.
Uh-huh. Okay, here we go. So we have a question. How do you use UCAN during your race as fueling? This is from Eric Gomez.
During the race, I do not, actually. I use it before, and it is one package of the super starch, the traditional powder, and that's what I mix into the oatmeal. Now, I would argue that because it's such a long, slow digesting energy source, that I'm using it throughout the entire race. And if I mess up that morning meal and completely blunt my fat burning metabolism with a meal of a bunch of fructose, let's say, for example, and shut down my fat burning, that I wouldn't have a very good race. So that meal before the race plays into what I'm accessing during the race just as much as the blocks that I take during a race. So I don't actually use UCAN during a race. The only thing that I might consider using is the and then I do have a coffee bar before, about 20 to 30 minutes before the race. I'll have about 2/3 of a coffee bar. So instead of having another gel or anything like that, I'll have that coffee bar because I like having a settled stomach with actual real food. And that coffee bar with a little bit of caffeine gives me a good little shot.
Cool. And then I think the question was specifically, towards like, how do you, Taren, use it during your races? But just in general, if the question was, how does one use it during your race? I could use my own Ironman nutrition plan to kind of give you a general sense of that. So typically before a half, or let's say a full Ironman event, I'd have a meal when I first wake up, similar to Taren. I have a meal that's not going to spike my blood sugar. And then 45 minutes before the race, I'll have 2 servings of UCAN. And then during the race on the bike, I'll have 2 bottles. One bottle has basically a serving an hour of UCAN. So if I'm on the bike for about 5 hours, that's 5 servings that I definitely need to have. I usually bring 6 or 7 at least, just to make sure that I have enough. And in case like a bottle ejects, then I'm not totally screwed. I also usually stash them in my bike special needs just in case something ejects and I need more. But I'll have about 5 or 6 servings while I'm on the bike of UCAN. And then once I get to the run, I have a gel flask in T2 that has a concentrated version of UCAN in it. That's like a gel. It's so concentrated. It's like 3 ounces of water with a serving of UCAN. And I'll bring that gel flask out of T2. I'll tuck it into my tri shorts as I'm running out of T2 until I get settled into the run. And then early on in the run, usually around mile 3 or so, I'll consume the gel flask, the 1 serving of UCAN. And then about halfway through the run, I'll actually switch over to whatever's on the course, whatever looks good to me at the time. It might be gels, it might be Red Bull, it might be flat Coke. But whatever is, there's several reasons for that. It's the convenience, but it's also the fact that later in the race, the risk of GI distress is really, really low because I've been taking UCAN the whole time. The risk of bonking is really low because it's now towards the end of the race and I've been using UCAN. Still getting that steady release from all the UCAN I was taking on the bike and earlier in the day. And then the other reason is because at that point of the race, sometimes you just want something sugary that's going to kind of trigger the reward centers in your brain. There's been studies to show that the high glycemic sugars do that, especially when you've got fatigue going on. So it decreases perceived effort and increases motivation and your actual performance. So we have another question. Just raced Barrelman this Sunday, my third 70.3 this season. I'm struggling with nutrition carrying me through the run. I'm trying to get it to scroll down here. Come on. For some reason, it's not letting me scroll down. There we go. I'm struggling with nutrition carrying me through the run. Is there a way not to experience that fall off?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of things that it can be. Number one is figuring out, I always start people with how many calories do you need? And we have a calculator that we give to the athletes that we have on our team. And if you go to triathlontaren.com, you can find it in the free resources page. And it gives you basically customized for how fast you are going to be going, the distance of your race, and how much you weigh, a really good approximation of exactly how many calories you're going to burn. And then you want to replace about 25% of that. And that's kind of the barometer for around how much you can also realistically absorb. Tends to be basically the same. And it's a lot more customized than sort of what you might find on a gel that just says take every 15 to 30 minutes. Like, that's a really big difference. So we always start people with that. And then what we typically say is divide up that amount of calories equally, starting with the serving before the race. I'm 20 to 30 minutes, Matt's 40 to 45 minutes. The serving of calories that you have before the race, and then the serving of calorie that you have after the swim, right up to the end of the bike. Divide it equally so that you're taking in calories roughly every 20 minutes. And the final piece is, I find that most people do better if they bump up their calories a little bit on the bike, about 5 to 10%, and go down a little bit, about 5 to 10%, with those feedings on the run. And that's what got me through 8 years of doing triathlons without any sort of nutritional bonking issues, cramping, never really feeling underfueled. It's not the absolute best, most customized, but it's a good starting point to start customizing your nutrition with something like UCAN, or with something like using the keto diet temporarily, or increasing your fat metabolism. Everything from my experience has been predicated on getting that, all right, how much do I need, figured out right from the start.
And then it looks like we've got a question. Sorry, there was actually a little bit more detail on that previous question, but I think Taren touched on it. And if you have any questions that I'd be able to help with, or that you'd like me to pass on to Taren, then you can email me at matthew.bach@ucanco.com. So that's Matthew, matthew@ucanco.com. And that goes for anybody that's listening. If you have questions, you can always shoot them to me, and we'll get them answered. So here's another question. Hey, Taren, so I'm new to the sport. I just competed in my first sprint triathlon in Wildwood, New Jersey. Not far. Well, I think I was at that race, actually. Try the Wildwoods. Not far. I don't know why I'm having such trouble here. So
See, this is why I don't get to stress. This is nice.
You get to sit back and
right now in my head, I'd be freaking out. Like, what is going on here? I'm not going to be able to ask a question.
I know, it's like the part that there's a little background there, but there's no actual question that I can see. So. All right, here we go. I think I got it. I just competed in my first sprint triathlon in Wildwood, New Jersey, not far from the Atlantic City event you recently completed in. I recently turned 50 and have primarily been just a road cyclist for the last 15 to 20 years. I had a really, and I mean really, difficult time with the open water swim. Physically, I was prepared for the swim distance, but mentally not for the open water aspect. Did you have any similar issues when you started out? And what do you suggest you do to overcome that anxiety that hit me hard? I finished, but the swim was definitely slow. Thank you. Alan from New Jersey.
Abso-freaking-lutely, I did. I have been afraid of water, and I'm not talking open water. Like, we had a pool when I was growing up, and I would dive into the pool, do a perfect cannonball, and then swim to the side and get out of the pool because I was convinced that the Loch Ness Monster somehow got into our pool every single time. And I was a grown, well, I was like a 15-year-old kid, still scared of the Loch Ness Monster in my backyard pool. And imagine how that felt when I started doing triathlon. Yeah, it's normal to have difficulty when you start swimming, even in a pool with a black line that is really easy to follow, but especially when you get into open water and you can't see the bottom of the lake, or maybe you can see the bottom of the lake and that freaks you out and there's a bunch of people around you and excitement. I found first, that I was terrified, but second, just that the more I did it in controlled scenarios, so a controlled open water swim with a swim buoy and a wetsuit, so that I've always got safety with the swim buoy. I've always got the wetsuit for buoyancy. I tended to do a lot of my early swims in a very controlled man-made lake that I could see the bottom, I could stand up most of the time. That gradually desensitized me, and there weren't really many other tricks that I did besides in open water. But the one thing that I did outside of open water that really prepared me for open water is really focusing on getting control of my breathing and breathing much more calmly in my pool swims. And that just sort of created a sense of calmness, a sense of control, a sense of I am exercising here, I'm not thrashing. And we've got a new book out that came about 6 weeks ago. I'm totally turning this into the Plug Taren show, by the way, Matt.
No, I was going to plug you because I know you had some videos coming out in this book coming out that, or videos that already came out that that Alan you can listen to that are about these drills and things that you can do to try to be more composed and calm in the water and try to prevent any of these anxiety. I mean, it's a common thing. A lot of people have those issues.
It's huge when I see people that get into triathlon that struggle with their breathing, that struggle with feeling confident in the water. It reminds me of those first few years that I spent struggling with the same things. And commonly, the tips that we see in magazines and in books assume that everyone already has a capable level of swim knowledge and that they're comfortable. Before you even get to a master's swim program, a triathlon group, a coach, you got to be able to breathe, period. So I wrote that book. It's called Triathlon Swimming Foundations. It's available on all the Amazons. And it's largely about those drills, like just how do you develop comfort in the water? And from that, then you can start worrying about racing. But we're all newborns in the water. We didn't come out of the womb knowing how to walk. It took us weeks and months to learn how to do it. It's very similar when we go into the pool and when we go into open water. We've got to start with tiny little baby steps to learn how to function there.
And many would argue that we were born to run. There's even a book on it, you know. But most people kind of believe that we weren't really born to swim. Like it's a very kind of unnatural type of thing. It's something that we humans have kind of taught so that, you know, learned so that we can do it. But it's not necessarily something that we were sort of designed to do. No. So Alan, I noticed we talked at the Wildwood, and you got a tri-starter pack before the rain hit pretty hard. That rain was insane. Basically like shut the entire expo down. It was pouring so much. So good to see you again. Eric Gomez, he says, not a question. So basically 1 serving of UCAN per hour. I'll stop right there and answer that question right away. So yes, during racing, I typically recommend that people take more UCAN per hour than they normally would in their training. And normally, so for me, just to like illustrate this, normally for me and many other people, they tend to be able to take somewhere between 50 and 100 calories an hour of UCAN while they're training. During racing, I tend to recommend 30 to 50 calories per hour more. So that might be, you know, 80 to maybe even as much as 130, 150 calories an hour of UCAN. That tends to yield better performance than if you're using the lower amounts. So there's not really much of a downside to taking something like 150 calories an hour of UCAN. But there is a downside to taking too little when the race intensity is higher than what you're used to in your training, and you could end up actually bonking. So that's why I always recommend taking a little bit more. So maybe it's 1 per hour instead of once for 90 minutes. And everybody's a little bit different. So you got to just kind of find what works best for you in your training. Maybe I'll email you after this. We met at Canceled New York City Tri late Friday, and I was amazed about this. I even tried it on my long bike ride during that heat wave weekend. Perhaps in the email you can explain to me more about the Ironman, half Ironman UCAN strategy, because I have so many GI issues that I can't run properly. Anyway, just in case, my email is write to you soon, and thanks for such an amazing conference call. So I can touch on that briefly here, and Eric, feel free to email me. We can certainly go back and forth on that by email as well to help you kind of refine it. And again, that goes out to anybody who wants some help refining their approach. For a half Ironman, well, I already described the Ironman regimen there. And as far as a half Ironman, I'll just briefly say I usually have a meal, then 2 servings of UCAN 45 minutes beforehand. On the bike, I'll have 1 serving per hour while I'm on the bike. So usually it's like 1 bottle with 3 servings in it. And then on the run, I'll just have about halfway through is when I'll feel like I might start needing something, and that's when I'll jump into the high glycemic stuff. So that's my approach from a UCAN standpoint, and maybe how you would want to try to approach it. But I can certainly help you sort of dial it in, especially from like if you're referring to like electrolytes and things too, how to incorporate them if it's hot out. But let's see, any more questions? By the way, I did fix the technology over here, so I'm good to go. If anybody has questions, I'm ready for it.
I was liking watching you sweat there.
Oh man, I literally was actually sweating. I could feel it like starting to beat up over here. I didn't want to leave any questions unanswered. So it looks like all the questions are answered for now. If anybody has another question over the next 20, 30 seconds or so, punch it in there and say, hold on. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And then if not, then we'll sign off in about 30 to 60 seconds. Any other words of wisdom or anything else you would want to share? Like what else is going on your end, Taren?
Well, the big thing that I want to get across is I think that triathlon is a tremendously powerful sport. I know that we've talked just strictly about nutrition and that we tend to focus on PBs and stepping up to different race distances, and it's always about more. But I think that the really powerful thing about triathlon isn't necessarily that we're always crushing PBs. It's that we are doing things that, we talk about being afraid of the water, getting over that fear and doing a race that you didn't think that you could do before. Doesn't matter what your time is. That helps you be a better triathlete, a better athlete, a better person, because you're more daring, you're more confident, you're surrounded by a bunch of people that are going through the same thing, that are growing as people as well. And we have to keep in mind that, yeah, there are GI distress issues and cramping that might prevent us from having a PB or the race of our life, or a 941 at Roth or a 428 at Atlantic City, or whatever your goal might be. But as long as we're out there doing it from an overall health standpoint, we are becoming better people, and it doesn't really matter what the time is. So sure, time is what gets the focus because it's something tangible, but I think something that's more important and much more badass is that it helps you be just a better person all around. So triathlon's a pretty powerful thing, and we've got to take a step back and remember that what we do is for health and overall well-being, not just times and bucket list things that we've got to check off.
Amen. Sometimes we lose sight of that, but really this is just an amazing lifestyle, and there's such an amazing community. Like everybody's just so amazing to interact with all the time. Like people are just out there having fun, and yeah, make sure you always stay like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions, so I think we'll wrap it up here. Like I said, if anybody wants to email me, the recording, I believe, will be sent to you automatically, probably right after this webinar, or if not, very, very soon. And feel free to email me with any of the questions that you have. And if it's a question specific to Taren, I can relay that question to Taren and get the answer for you that way as well. So thank you very much, Taren, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Thanks for having me, everyone. Great questions.
Yeah, and I'll see you on the Big Island.
Yeah, exactly. Kona.
Yeah. All right, cool. Signing out. Thank you, everyone.